the war leader commanded everyone into position. Attention all ships. We will begin our invasion in 1 minute. Prepare all ships to engage human forces. With that, the ships began to move into position as they had just dropped out of FTL speeds. The human fleet was out amongst the stars, scattered to protect its few colonies that it had. Though it had procured several different technologies as they had fought off 3 different invasion forces, it was still believed they did not have the forces enough to fight against a full invasion. The which is almost impossible to pronounce via human language, a crustacean-looking species that stood approximately 3.4 meters tall. They were ready to fight, as they believed that their brethren that had gone down simply to collect some slaves and some food, which the humans were to them. They believed that these were simple casualties, victims, if you will, because they did not come there to destroy everyone, but they had come simply to take a little bit for trade and a little bit of slaves for themselves. And yet the entire force was met with annihilation. And not only that, but the video of them being tortured by being boiled to death and then being consumed by the humans had enraged their entire population. All ships, prepare to fire on my command. With that, the weapons were lined up and ready to go. Captain? Yes, what is it? Sir, we have something coming in. I believe is there a meteor shower? Sir, I don't believe we should remain here. Something is coming our way. You want to explain that, comms officer? Yes, sir. It seems as though a lot of the materials in this sector are flying our way. We wouldn't even be able to shoot them all down. We need to adjust our spacing. Unacceptable. We will proceed through. Our hull is strong enough, can deflect anything that's happening. Sir, they're coming at... It's enough. Tell all ships to engage as soon as they lock onto the enemy. Yes, sir. What is that? Suddenly, the ship jolted from side to side, shaking as many projectiles crashed into it, many of them piercing the hull, punching straight through the ships, others of them just launching in and getting stuck halfway through. These giant pieces of metal now stuck into each of the ships, looking like they had been attacked by a giant porcupine as they simply drifted through space. Report! Sir, we've been shot. I can see that. What have we been shot by? Sir, these came up as asteroids, sir, but not as many. They were flying so fast. I tried to tell you. Enough. Continue to advance. Tell all ships still remaining to fire on the humans. Yes, sir. And with that, their weapons began to fire out. Their energy weapons streaked across the sky, many of them suddenly deflecting about halfway. Tell me, why are these weapons deflecting? They should already pierce the human fleet. Some of them are, sir. Some of them are, but some are being deflected. We don't know why. Suddenly the ship shook again. This time, on their sensors, they could see many ships actually bursting as they were simply pierced through by another round of projectiles. Can't you get a lock on these? What happened to our point defense systems? Sir, they're moving too fast. They're moving so fast we can't... And with that, another round of pulls went through the ship, this time piercing the comms officer and skewering him from left to right. As his body went limp, it fell onto the console. By the great maker, what are they shooting us with? Before he could say anything else, another volley struck them, this time piercing right through the captain, affixing him to his seat, although it did not kill him. All ships, advance at full speed. Flank speed ahead and take down the humans before they can. Evasive maneuvers, everybody. I say again, evasive maneuvers, get to them as fast as you... And that was the last thing he said as another spike hit his ship, piercing right through the bridge and right through his head. The ship, at that point, drifted, and yet 50% of the fleet was still operational, but dropping 49%. 48%, 47%. And as they finally got out of the way of the projectiles that were moving so fast that their own systems could not track, they spread far out and wide. Many of the captains screaming for their admiral to say something. Their war leader had to give them commands. But without any other commands, they simply followed the last order, which was attack the humans, which they did. They went with sheer ferocity, pushing their ships as fast as they could towards the planet. They were still 3 times lunar orbit away from the planet, and yet they came in with sheer ferocity. They began firing every which way they saw a human vessel. Some of their weapons would strike a human vessel, but it would either reflect off the hull or simply not do any damage. It wasn't until they got within 2 lunar orbits that they finally realized that they were close enough that the energy weapons would focus enough to do damage. The humans seemed to know this as they began to pull away, banking as far away as they could. Some of them doing a reverse burn, trying anything they could to get away from their enemy as they continued to fire. But this time, instead of firing those strange pieces of metal, instead they were firing some sort of self-propelled munition. This munition guided its way towards their ships and began to crash against the hull. Though not as dangerous or deadly as being pierced through and through by a solid piece of tungsten, the missiles seemed to bust in through the outer hull, not causing enough damage to stop them, but definitely enough where they would have to land on the planet to conduct repairs. But this is exactly what they wanted to do anyway. They wanted to take over humanity, and they would farm humanity like any other animal that they were going to consume. And they moved their way in, but the human fleet still dogged them. Even though they were outnumbered easily 30-1, the human fleet continued to fight as they fall back. As they eventually fell back far enough to the other side of the planet itself, they waited for the satellites to begin firing before they added the rest of their munitions. Eventually, the human ships were limited to only their energy weapons, but their energy weapons were nowhere near as capable yet of anything the enemy could hit them with. And it seemingly in unison, they all either ducked behind the planet or dove for the surface, relying on the planet's magnetosphere to refract any type of energy weapon that came through. This was an act of desperation, and the enemy, without hesitation, followed them down. It would take them approximately 7.8 human hours to get to the surface. Following their orders to the letter, they all headed down towards the planet's surface. However, once they reached the atmosphere, those that had cracks in their hull found out very quickly that the density of the atmosphere of Earth was more than what they could handle, and several of them burned up on the way down, simply tossing and turning, sometimes spinning, other times simply exploding into the air. This would cause a shock wave that, in many cases, radiated through their entire fleet, causing even more to lose control on the way down and landing harder than they really wanted to. The Earth was not defenseless either. It fired up with reckless abandonment. The amount of ordnance that they saw dwarfed the amount that they dealt with before. They tried to use any type of EMPs or any type of targeted weapon system, but it didn't seem to matter. It didn't even slow them down. The enemy aircraft would come in barely within any type of sensor range and just start launching all sorts of ordnance. Before they could even be targeted by the enemy ordnance, they would simply bank away and leave, leaving 4, 8, 16, Lord knows how much more ordnance coming in. Sometimes they would see, strangely, what looked like a cargo aircraft moving very, very slowly. They believed this would be a bomber, and then suddenly they realized that something had just been dropped out. But why was it dropped so far away, hundreds of kilometers out? How could it possibly strike? And then all of a sudden they realized, as this large aircraft banked away, that what it had thrown out was more ordnance, as the ordnance itself sprayed out from its containers and it spread across the field, heading straight towards them. The enemy coming down towards Earth tried desperately to try and shoot down the ordnance, but they were having the hardest time locking onto them. Many of the aircraft that came in and fired ordnance were unseen by the sensors and could only be seen by the naked eye. How were the humans able to do this? But it didn't matter. They were there to take the planet. Even though they had lost almost 60% of their forces, they believed it would still be easy to take the humans. Even though the humans had their carapace, they would not be able to hold up against the true warrior class coming through towards them. The warrior class were bred specifically for their size, their strength, and their sheer meanness when it comes to taking down an enemy. They were the ones who would face the others, any others that would pose a threat, that is. And when they found others that posed a threat, they would use their massive claws to rip them apart, showing each of them what it meant to challenge their might. Yet, they had not faced anything like this before. So much was being taken from them. The percentage of their losses was climbing up towards 70%. Most militaries would have cut their losses and run at this point, but they didn't have a choice. Too many of their ships had been damaged, and they didn't want to go back empty-handed to face the Queen. If they faced the Queen with these type of losses, they would all be executed as an example. So they had one choice, and that was to continue to push farther ahead. And as they landed, they believed that many of the places they landed were completely unoccupied by humans. But that didn't matter. Within several hours of them landing, they barely got their heavy weapons out, heavy weapons being their warrior class. As many of the human forces came in, they were rolling in with strange vehicles that seemed to be on wheels, other ones on some sort of tracks, and they all fired at them as they rolled in. Every single one of their warrior class would charge towards the lines, taking hits left and right, causing them to flinch all over, many of them having their claws blown open, blown off, some of them their heads completely blown open. In a few cases, you would hear duk, 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 and then suddenly one of them would be missing all of their legs. Not just one, not just two, but all of their legs. These humans were insanely accurate with their fire, and whatever the hell they were throwing was able to pierce through the carapace. And this was the moment that they truly feared. They realized that the humans might have been easier to take before, but now that they had a chance to examine the carapace and examine those that had come before, they were ready. As it takes sometimes almost a decade in human terms to be ready to get an engagement fleet over towards them, as it takes time to put the call out for more, to breed more of their soldiers, to build the ships, and of course to travel across the stars. The humans had not been idle at this time, but the humans seemed to want a piece of them. And this time the warriors worried. What type of pieces would they eat first? With this, several ships released their entire warrior caste in a mad rush across the battlefield. If they were able to, they would crash into these strange human vehicles, grabbing a hold of the main barrel and crushing it inside their claws. Yes, these humans might be tough, but yes, they were still able to be beaten. They would raise up their other claw and crash down on it, many times damaging it to the point where it could no longer move. The top of it would no longer pivot around. However, in a few cases, as they held onto the barrel, the top would simply pivot, yanking the warrior down onto the ground, and then it would simply ram into it as hard as possible. The humans, they wouldn't just shoot you. They'll beat you down. They'll hold you down. They'll stab you. They'll rip you to pieces, and that's exactly what they did. The few ships that landed in populated areas found that even those not wearing any type of armor would come at them with anything they could, projectile weapons, metal, whatever the hell they could find, even hunks of wood they would throw at the invaders. This was insane. The humans seemed to be conscious enough to know what would happen to them if they lost, so they were fighting to stop extinction. And because of that, they were fighting to protect their own young, their own species, and because of that, they became desperate. And when they're desperate, they are dangerous. They're so dangerous that unarmored humans piled on to one of our warrior caste, and the ones in charge, the captains, the executive officers, even war leaders, looked on in horror as they would lose several of theirs, in some cases watching their own humans being cut in half or being dropped down the warrior's maw and hearing a sickening crunch and it would make them even more dangerous as they would thrash on top, going specifically for the warriors' eye stalks, in a few cases grabbing a hold of them, reaching with both of their upper appendages, squatting down low, and then hearing this scream, grunt, whatever it was, as one of the eye stalks was ripped clean out of the warrior caste. Trying to protect the other would duck it down, but they didn't care. Others would come up, even if this one died in the attempt to take the second eye stalk. It wouldn't matter. Another one would show up and simply try to gouge it out with a piece of metal, a piece of whatever they could find. They would hit it with pieces of building materials if they had to. It didn't matter. It was an extreme melee. Those that faced the metal behemoths that were on that planet turned out to be the lucky ones, as those main guns, if they struck in the torso or the head, it was instantly done as the body was blown apart. Apparently, these rounds were designed to rip open metal machines of the same caliber, and could do so very easily. And because of that, the invasion was doomed. Only a half a dozen ships desperately tried to reach the stratosphere, tried to escape, and were simply mauled by aircraft, mauled by ground fire, mauled by the sheer number of ships that had come back across the planet, rearmed and reloaded and fired down at them. Only one had made it outside the atmosphere, and it didn't have a chance to go into FTL, as it was simply torn to tiny, tiny little pieces, as they saw from watching well out of the way. One scout ship had saw this. They had saw that the humans not only had beaten the ship down, had not only punctured it with those strange spikes of metal, not only had hit it with those, we would found out later were what the humans called missiles, but they had simply kept firing until every single compartment had been ripped asunder. Even half of the ship fell back down into the atmosphere and began to burn up, leaving a type of fireworks display for the humans. A quick look into their own video feed saw the humans cheering and laughing, that horrible, horrible sound of the human laugh, as once again they would stand on top of the warriors, stand on top of even those that were support, those that would not fight, could not fight. It didn't matter. They were all massacred, ripped apart, and the humans once again would pull off their helmets if they were wearing some and simply take bites out as seemingly an act of defiance, and simply look to the sky, raise their hands, and extend the middle of their digits, and they would scream something out. Mate you. There was something wrong in the translation. This is most likely a loss of not understanding all the different cultures, as some of them would raise up and they would give a different type of wave to the sky. Some of them waving their shoes, others raising their hand up, raising all their digits high and waving it. It was strange. Each one had a strange way of defying us, but it didn't matter. I, Captain give this report, and again the warning: we should stay away from humanity. They have found that we are a viable food source, and we have now known that our prey has become our predator. I only say this because as we were about to leave, the human ships turned towards us, and they accelerated as fast as possible. If not for the fact that my crew is very good at their job, we would not have made it out, as we were about 3.1 seconds away from being struck by their ballistic weapons. They come at us at over Mach 8. It is insane. And now they have our warships. By the time we are able to create more and grow another set of warrior caste, they will be far too dangerous. I recommend that we make peace with them or set up a defense line. But for the love of all that is holy, I scream up to the Great Maker, and I beg the Empress to heed my words. Do not send our people in there. the humans have found out the truth about how to defeat us, and they've also found out another simple truth, something we believed of them, that we are extremely crunchy on the outside, but very squishy on the inside. As the humans would say, we are yummy.